wonderful. I actually have the most interesting resume to share with you today. So listen as I tell you about this extraordinary woman. Seventh generation Tennessean, Lynn, Bachleda. 7 generations. That's going way back at 18. When,
Yeah, they were all dirt farmers, I'm sure.
nonetheless, they had staying power. She's been a Nashville freelance researcher and writer for more than 40 years. She's applied her expertise as a generalist for clients such as the state of Tennessee, Bell South, Metro Nashville, the British Broadcasting Corporation, Brown University's Foreign Policy Development Center, Chevron, Time Life Books and Music, and former Secretary of State George P. Shultz at Stanford University, among many others. Most of her projects have addressed aspects of public history, specializing in developing content and interpretive settings for museums. She has worked with leading firms to create exhibits for clients such as the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute in Alabama, the International Storytelling Center in Jonesboro, and the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame in Knoxville. She has collaborated many times with the Tennessee State Museum. The most notable of these is the state of Tennessee's Bicentennial Capitol Mall, a 19-acre urban park, which our own Kim Hinton is very much a part of. She researched and wrote most of the granite engraved text detailing the political, social, scientific, military, artistic, and natural histories of her state. In 2011, the American Planning Association designated the mall as one of the top 10 great spaces in America. She's authored and edited 12 books. A Guide to the Natchez Trace Parkway earned the Independent Presses Association's prestigious Benjamin Franklin Award from the ground up mystical places of memory and the near eternal essays toward form. Is her most personal book and is best described as spiritual archaeology on 3 continents. A History of Nashville's Warner Parks, published in 2021 for the Friends of Warner Parks, and that is Bachleda's most recent volume. Today she's going to share with us the magic of the parks and the history.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank
you. Thank you very much. It's wonderful of you to brave the weather, you know? Really, thank you for being here. And I would really like to offer a round of applause for Jean Roseman. She's devoted. You all probably know that, but I know that because she's been trying to get me here faithfully for a couple of years, and she wore me down. So I wrote about 40% of this book, and I edited all of it, and I did the picture research for it, which is a blast, and Bob Parrish.
You move that mic back, your feedback is your way.
Oh, okay.
You got feedback.
Okay. Is that better?
That would be probably, you're feeding off each other a little too much.
Okay, is this good?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah? Thank you for telling me. That's great. Anyway, Bob Parrish really owes equal or greater credit. He's had a 40-year career with the parks and this could not have been done without him. And he's our age. And he has a mind like a steel trap, so it's still possible. So the book, you can get the book at the Nature Center at the park. You can get it at Parnassus. You can also get it on Amazon. The retail is $40. So everything that I'm going to talk about today has been pilfered from the book. So if it strikes you as interesting, that's what you can do. We're going to go through things somewhat quickly. I don't want to rush things too much, but I do have about 40 slides to go through, and excuse me, it's only half the story, so stay tuned. We'll see what happens. What you have here is the state wildflower, which is the passion flower, which you can find in the park. And for those of you that wonder and say, well, it's the iris. The iris is the cultivated flower, state flower. The passion flower is the flower that the children of Tennessee chose when they were given a vote as to what should be the state flower. So that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Okay, and there's a little bit of a lag.
Hit the arrow.
I am.
Well, then we have to get Tracy. It's his computer.
So what's about to come up? I wasn't in the right place. Just do it there. Okay. So now should I be able to hit the arrow? Or?
Maybe not.
I finished this presentation at about 4:30 this morning because I thought, oh, it's the parks. I know all about the parks. Well, that was 2 years ago, and you know how that goes. So I hope I tell somewhat of a coherent story. So you're probably familiar with Bellevue, where I live. Vaughn's Gap is kind of in the heart center of the park. It was a big deal. It's not such a big deal anymore, except it's been, commemorized by a road, a creek, something else. And so that's the area that we're going to be concerning ourselves with. The little Harpeth that comes into the park is really, it comes into the park from Williamson County and just makes that little loop up by Hicks Mill. Okay. So now you know where you are. Well, hell. Maybe you should just pull up a chair and be right here. So I tried the arrow. I hope I can get the arrow keys to work. I loved those.
You can also try the space bar.
Okay. So this is a mastodon jaw that was found on Edward Hicks' property. Edward Hicks is Devon Farm, where Ensworth High School is now. It's very interesting that when Ensworth was building their tennis courts, there happened to be an employee of the Department of Archaeology for the state that was driving to work and he noticed mounds of dirt that had bones in them. And so he went to work, and he told Nick Fielder, the state archaeologist, what he had seen. And so what they found was that there was a middle archaic settlement there. And what Ainsworth did, they really did the best that they could possibly do, went through many procedures. Those human remains are located on the Ainsworth property, but you can't find that out unless you get a judge's permission, because there are a lot of hunters that would love to go desecrate that. So after we have the Middle Archaic era people there, which is represented by the people butchering the mastodon, the historic Cherokee and Shawnee people also likely hunted and settled in the area. The thing that's tricky is that the things that have been revealed have been through the development of subdivisions. So, and to some extent agriculture. So highly likely in the park, under the dirt that has not been disturbed because it's a park, there are many, many remains there. So let's try the space bar. Yay! Tracy. Okay, so what's hard to remember, and I had a cute little list that I was going to go through, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to. How many people knew that there was a really settled community where the park is now? Okay, a few, but not very many. As you can see from this aerial photo, the ever-present landmark that I loved doing this project is the steeplechase oval. And we'll talk a little bit about more in a minute. But you can see there's beautiful flat land, such as where the steeplechase is and those houses to the right now. And it's hilly as hell, right? So the people that lived there were unable to farm the hills, but they had a passionate attachment to what would be the equivalent of bottomland. So when I was looking for the thread of the whole story, you know, I got the archaic people, I got the Native American people, and I got the pioneers. Well, what came between the Native Americans and the pioneer people? So I found that I was overjoyed when I found this on Fold 3. Thomas Finney was one of the Revolutionary War land grant folks, and he, had he been able to keep his land intact, his descendants would be quite wealthy, because he had the whole, basically, of Belle Meade, including what we think of as the front entrance to the park, which was for a long time known as the high pasture. Now, this is not in the park at all, but I think it's a lovely image of what that land must have looked like to the people who settled there. And they were there early. James Hodge is one of the first, and if you can see the dates, born in 1774 and he died in 1817. So he was in what is now the area of the park like 1800, so, you know, a good 200 years ago. And there are some beautiful photographs of people who lived there. And I love this one because it shows that not everybody was out farming potatoes all the time. Mary Ophelia Cartwright was, she was raised in the Hodge house, which is that house that's been restored on Chickering, if you know that pretty little white frame house. And the Sawyers, which is another prominent name you hear associated with that period of the park history, bought the house from Mary's mother, Jenny Northern. Northern is another very common name that you will hear in addition to the park. Johnson Vaughan was he was a hard-working man. He made a fortune, and he started out as a bricklayer. And where he comes into play is his son, John William, who was known as Squire, so you get the drift there, continued his father's legacy and was a very, very successful farmer. And as you can see, he has quite the bearing of a squire in this picture. And when push came to shove about was it going to be a park and those people pushed out or not, Squire Vaughan literally fought to his death. When we're pretty sure actually that the house that is next to the steeplechase that is still standing, we can't say it for sure, but we think that was his house. And he had an arrangement with the city to just let him stay for, okay, just let me stay 2 more years. Okay, just let me stay 6 more months. I won't make any improvements to the land. I won't plow it or anything, because I know you want to make a park. And so he kept edging against the development as a park, which is kind of an unheard of idea today because everybody's in favor of parks, right? If you're not in favor of parks, okay. So we're all in agreement here. And so he took the city, he took it all the way to the Tennessee Supreme Court, fighting for that land to not be taken over as a park. The story of that is pretty interesting in and of itself. And one more note about Squire. He died in the house, so they never did get him to leave.
Which house? By the steeplechase?
Mm-hmm.
To get it off of Old Hickory Boulevard?
Mm-hmm. Yep. You kind of see a horse or two grazing in the front yard. So here's how it started. Luke Lee, who, if you don't know about him, was just an amazing man. I mean, he was truly visionary. He was one idea after the other. And when Belmead Plantation fell on sad times and the land was being sold, he thought, I think that'd make a hell of a good development area. And so he bought a lot of that land. And the people that were living in the area, we'll call them the settlers for just as shorthand, the people who were living in the area thought they kind of laughed at him behind his back because they thought, what's he going to do with that scrub land? That's just, it's just, you can't do anything with that land. Well, Luke, having been in Washington as a senator, was familiar with Rock Creek Park. And so he saw the potential for a park that he thought would be a perfect amenity for his subdivision. So that's why he thought, okay, I'll buy scrubland. That looks like pretty good parkland to me. So this, okay, I'm going to just read you, if you can't read it, I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but just to give you a little taste. This was a letter written to the editor 50 years after the parks were founded. And it shows you how heated it was at the time. By Louise Neal Gaddis. Percy Warner Park is a history which few people know. This history has never been told or publicized because it would reveal the chicanery by which over 1,759 acres of Percy Warner Park was obtained. Luke Lee is presented as the philanthropist who gave 868 acres to Percy Warner Park. That's true. He gave a wilderness untillable, uninhabitable except by rattlesnakes and wild animals, known as the high pasture. And that's really that, if you come in to the park from the main entrance off Belle Meade, that's where the high pasture started. It was enough acreage for publicity, but this seemingly generous gift entailed not an ounce of sacrifice on his part. What about the other 1,759 acres of Percy Warner Park? In the fall of 1927, 12 or 15 farm sites, some consisting of 300 to 500 acres, and one with a mile frontage on Chickering Road, you can imagine what that would be worth today, were confiscated. Families were uprooted from their ancestral homes. One had been in the family for 7 generations. So she goes on to write, these were the Kaiserism days of the Luke Lee machine and his puppet governor, Henry Horton. A law was ramrodded through the state legislature which gave the city the right to condemn land outside the city limits. They made a special proposal so that they could act upon that land even though it was not within the city limits. So this writer goes on to, it was a conniving deed with the veneer of legality. In fact, there was nothing illegal, really. I mean, all the laws were observed. Sometimes laws were created to facilitate things, but there was nothing illegal about what they did. And that comes into play yet more. But here's a little sweet spot story that Luke Lee provided this land, again, the high pasture, the very front of the park, for Camp Andrew Jackson, where soldiers were, I don't know, is bivouac the right word? Where you wait until you're deployed? So this is kind of an amazing photograph, and it's thanks to Ridley Wills. So here we have a look at the parkland. Doesn't look too inviting. It is winter, but it does fulfill the promise of scrubland for sure. Belle Meade was the owner of that front high pasture land, so that was part of the land that Luke acquired. So Belle Meade figures into the story. Cheekwood figures into the story. Leslie Cheek, as you can see from this, I had never seen this photograph before. This quite amazing residence. And what it did, it provided a buffer for the park boundary. So that the land that belonged to belongs to Cheekwood now, and some of it's been sold off, but the land that's up against the park has protected that boundary of the park, which has been enormously valuable to the park. So Luke Lee was the son-in-law of Percy Warner. Percy Warner was quite an interesting man. He was, among other things, head of the streetcar company. And Luke said to his father-in-law, I want to do this development. And there's a spur of the streetcar line, which you see running off to the southwest here. What about if you extend the streetcar line to become what became Belmead Boulevard. And that way, I will have transportation for my new development. You will have guaranteed riders because they'll be there and they'll need to get to their jobs in the city. Sounds like a win-win. And Percy said, yeah, let's do that. And again, there was nothing illegal about it. It was just a very strongly fitting hand and glove operation. So, this is in 1937. It's quite an amazing photograph. What you're in the park and you're looking down the hill from the high pasture out Belmead Boulevard that's going toward Harding. And as you can see, Luke Lee's development didn't take off like hotcakes right away. This is 10 years after the park was founded, and really all you've got in terms of houses is that little gaggle up there at the top left center. But if you drive the Belmead Boulevard today, you can see that it's rather filled in. So Percy Warner took a deep interest in the development of the park because one of the reasons why he was sold on the idea of a park is that he was chairman of the park board because he was very civic-minded, and he envisioned Nashville surrounded by a ring of parks, which sounds like a pretty wonderful idea to me. Unfortunately, he did not live long enough to see that happen. He didn't even live long enough to see Percy Warner Park opened. And the reason why it's called Percy Warner Park is because Luke Lee said, no, you should not, do not name it after me, name it after my father-in-law. So that's why it is what it is. And he and his brother, Edwin Warner, cared so much about the development of the park that they rode horseback all through the woods to figure out what the best views would be. So you've got this, I think, just amazing photograph of that vintage automobile, which kind of tells you exactly where you are in time. So another interesting thing about the park, it was not open the way that we do it today. There was no big hoopla and a cutting of the ribbon or anything. It was just kind of like, as soon as the land was bought, people started going there and camping and hanging out and doing what people do. So the same thing applied really for when they actually finally opened the roads in 1930. Now this is a similar view of what you just saw, but it's reversed. So you're looking now down onto the high pasture, and you're going, the alley goes into the woods. You can see on the right, you can see those circles that look sort of odd. Those are the sand traps for the golf course. And the shady areas above those are trees, and the Edwin Doherty gates still stand majestically.
Excuse me,
Yes.
I used to drive through that park all the time. Why did they close, don't let you drive through it anymore?
The walkers can use the roads.
Precisely. And I can't walk anymore. I used to walk the park a lot, and so I really, I'm with you. I miss that you can't do that front drive. But what happened is the demands of the public moved away from taking a Sunday drive to taking a Sunday jog. And so the whole usage kind of moved away from that. But I'm with you. I'm sad about it too. The Friends of the Warner Parks are, it's an astonishing organization that has its own history. that I will, if we do part 2 of this talk, I will go into that in more detail. Jenny Hannon is the executive director now, and man, you talk about a fireball who can get stuff done. It's Jenny Hannon. She's raising money and she's spending it on the park. She's really got her sights on the upcoming 200th birthday of the park. So this is the view of the restoration of the LA, and Edward Fleming was the architect that designed it, and you can't, now you can see what he had in mind, basically. For a long time it was kind of covered up just by the brush. Another huge player for the parks was the WPA. There wouldn't be hardly anything in the park except just wild land. You know, all of the picnic areas, they had Boy Scout cabins, they had shelters, they had, they also developed the steeplechase, which was pretty controversial at the federal level because there was a lot of, what do these people do? We're using federal money to, develop this land for a few people to ride their horses one day in the year. But this woman who was the secretary to the gentleman in the federal office prevailed and said, I think you should do this. So it was done. The WPA stonework, I think the stonework in the park is magnificent. And I think it's one of the signature things that tells you you're in the Warner Parks. The WPA was comprised of people who were out of work, and they were not skilled laborers. So the fact that somehow they were able to do all this stonework that pretty much holds together all these years later is amazing. Horses and golf were always going to be in the Warner Parks, in Percy Warner in particular. The Warner brothers did ride, as we know, because they surveyed a lot on horseback. And they both played golf, which is amazing because Edwin Warner had lost his arm in a hunting accident when he was 16. So he was a one-armed golfer. And if you play golf, you can imagine how difficult that would be. So horse trails were one of the first things that they put together. And this sweet little photograph, I just love the little posts and rails. So golf and horse-related events were the only sports allowed in Percy Warner. That's why the ball fields and everything else is across the road at Edwin Warner. Keeping on the horse theme, did anybody here go riding ever in the park? Okay. You remember Big John Folks who would, look at you and go, well, you probably can't ride worth crap. I was one of those. So he is a wonderful character. And then this building on the right, the Riding Academy, that was where you could stable your horse. You could board your horse, which would be pretty ideal. More horsey news. This was, the town was really quite a twitter with the idea of the Iroquois opening because, people have been watching the course being built and, Nashville has Middle Tennessee has a great equestrian legacy. So this was a big deal. Yes, sir?
Does the Vaughn House show up in that photograph? Is it where park headquarters is?
Yes. Yes. You nailed it. And the reason Marcellus Frost was riding his horse, Jock, I think, one day, and he kind of went, this place would make a really good land for steeplechase because we've got this great flat expanse. Then we've got these hills where the spectators can see the whole course. And that's unusual for a steeplechase course. Another way that the parks broke into new territory, the model airplane field. Has anybody ever flown a plane there or watched them? Have you? Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty interesting just to go watch them now. So, as the caption says, we have one of the oldest model airplane fields, if not the oldest, in the United States. And this is such a 1950s picture. I just, the way that, I don't know, the way they're all dressed, it's just great. So keeping with the idea that horses and golf were the two things that were allowed. If you don't play golf, Percy Warner is a sweet little 9-hole course. And it has had 3 clubhouses in its history. The first you see on the upper left, and then the middle one was named for A.J. Shively, who was the pro who worked there and ran it. And then they did the new one that opened in 2015, which is pretty deluxe.
So are those other 2 torn down now?
Yes. Yes, long gone. I know that the third one is on the site of the second one. And I don't know about, I assume that the first one was where the second one became.
The first one's probably on the 9-hole course, right?
Yeah, that Percy Warner Golf Course is the 9-hole
Yeah,
course.
And that's where the first clubhouse would have been.
Yeah.
And the other 2 are on the 18-hole course.
No,
No?
those, what you just saw is all Percy Warner clubhouses. The Harpeth Hills Golf Course is a separate deal that came on board in the late 50s, early 60s. So here in the park layout, speaking to that point, on the far left side, you can see, you may not be able to make it out, but it says proposed golf course. So that's where you come into play with Harpeth Hills. Also, above that, in that funny looking little pie-shaped piece, there was a movement in Nashville to make it Iris City. And so women got together and planted iris everywhere they possibly could, along roadsides, people's homes, the fields, wherever. And, chances are, if you have iris that you haven't bought, you might have some that were there in what's Edwin Warner Park. It's possible because they had to go somewhere and nobody knows where they went. Margaret Lindsley Warden, does anybody remember that name? Yeah, she's a darling little lady, always in the white gloves, and was strongly affiliated with the Pony Club. She established the first United States chapter here in Middle Tennessee and anchored it at the Warner Parks. So the equestrian history at the parks is rich and broad, and then, by the 60s you've got polo. So I used to go flip out a lawn chair in the back of my pickup truck and watch it on Sunday. It was pretty interesting. So here is Harpeth Hills. And Beverly Briley as mayor, and I was being a little bit mean to put this in, but hey, it happened, The story is that he showed up to hit the first ball just drunk as a coon, and so he kind of missed the shot, and unfortunately, it was captured. The moment, it's a perfect moment in a lot of ways. And I used to play golf, and I certainly wish I still could, and I can empathize, but still, in a professional role, you know. And one more thing about the Harpeth Hills Golf Course. It is highly regarded regionally. You know, we think, well, it's just, you know, it's just our municipal course and it's not that big a deal. And the PGA has had events there. Bless you. And it's hard as hell to play. Do we have any golfers in the room? Yeah. There's that one hole where you just have to hit it straight up, and you've got, you know, it feels like you have a place to land that's about as big as this table. And that's the signature hole. So, okay, so the Warner Parks obviously have meant a lot of things to a lot of people. So I was going to just ask you, but you can mentally think from this list. Have you ever walked, hiked, or run in the park? Ridden a horse? Attended a program at the Nature Center? Picnicked? Bird watched? Watched or played a baseball or soccer game? Went to a star party? Yes. Helped band birds? Okay. The bird program, if we do another one of these, we'll talk more. It's a very big deal at the Warner Parks. Have you ever walked the trace that's in the park, the Natchez Trace segment? You know, when you come into Edwin Warner, and if you go to the left, you go to the Nature Center, and if you go to the right, you go to that parking lot. The trail that runs alongside that parking lot
Over to the Innsworth campus?
is a part of the Natchez Trace. The Natchez Trace was not just like one superhighway. It was a lot of kind of squirrely trails. But yeah. Who has visited a park cemetery? They do a program where you get to go to these cemeteries of the families that lived there, which is very interesting. Splashed in a creek, flew a model airplane, played golf. How many people have attended the steeplechase? Okay, many hands. Run a marathon or cross country or watched a grandchild do it. Maybe you attended a fundraiser like Sunday in the Park or the Old Time Pickin' Party that they have in the summer. Maybe you've admired the Hodge House that the Friends of the Park restored on Chickering Road that's over 200 years old, and they literally took every board and brick. The only thing that was left standing were the two chimneys. Did you ever do anything romantic in the park? Did you ever get busted? Okay, then, we all know what we're talking about. So the park now, I mean, who would think about doing anything to harm the park? And the park was very beloved. Nashville was very excited and embraced it fully when it opened in 1927. And there was all this buzz of the new things being built and the new amenities. But by the 60s, people started treating the park like a dumping ground. Contractors would just, put their refuge there. You can see this sofa that somebody pushed out the back of the truck. So the 70s were a real turning point for the park, because it was really in a lot of decline. It wasn't safe. The roads were full of potholes. Okay, the park has been incredibly lucky. The parks, when I say that, I mean both Edwin and Warner, in that the right people have come along at the right time many times. So on the left, you have, as they call themselves, the Four Musketeers. Charles Farrell, on the left, was a Vanderbilt biology professor. At that time, Vanderbilt had a mandatory retirement age, if I'm not mistaken, and so he was booted out. And he thought, well, okay, what am I going to do? Okay, let's go volunteer at the parks. And he found these three people: Deb Beasley, standing next to him, Sandy Bivens, who was the Nature Center director before Vera Roberts, and Bob Parrish, who I spoke of earlier, who was invaluable in putting together the book, who was the director of the parks. Farrell is dead. The other three people have put in each 40 years at the park. Bob is still there as the Friends. He's an employee of the Friends, I think, technically, and he's the resource manager and historian. So he's still plugging away. Farrell saw these three young people who were eager and committed, and he turned them into park professionals, primarily in terms of research. Not many people know that the Warner Parks have make phenomenal contributions to research in birding, in particular, in water quality management, a lot of things that they really put the parks on the map. And these people were the ones who documented, who started a life list of the species. And now as of 2 years ago, they had documented 1,166 species in the park. Yes, Sandra.
What was Deb Beasley's background? How'd she get?
There was a I think this is right. There was a program called CETA, C-E-T-A, Comprehensive Employment and Training Act. I think she was a CETA employee, and she started out wrangling the trails, because trail maintenance there is a phenomenal job, because people wear down the trails, and they have to be mulched, and it's just it's an ongoing, what I would think of as a nightmare. But anyway, Deb would round up volunteers and go in there with a giant weed whacker and lay steps. So it's that, yeah. Sandy was, and still is, definitely involved in the bird program. So on the right, how many people know Eleanor Willis? Okay, Eleanor, you talk about the right person at the right time. The first director
In the 50s, she was on a television show called Romper Room.
Yes, she was. That is a true story. I have heard that from her lips. Georgette Chapman was the first executive director of the Friends. And she got it off the ground. She got a mailing list together. She got a computer, and started making it administratively a thing. Then Eleanor came along, and Eleanor can raise money like an angel. I mean, I said to her one time, what was it like for you to be asking for money all the time? Was that hard? And she said, no, it wasn't hard at all. She said, people love the parks, and so I just asked them, and they were happy to give. which is kind of a wonderful idea, I think. But anyway, Eleanor made many, many, many improvements possible because she was a good fundraiser. Now, Vera Roberts is the current Parks Director, and I cannot even tell you how many things she has to do to make the whole thing run. Like all the programming, all of the garden stuff, you know, just even keeping the pond together that's good for kids, all the park improvements, working with volunteers. She does, in the tradition of the Warner Parks, she does a hell of a job. The parks have this ability to attract really talented, committed people that just stay and do the job. So, that is the story for today. Now, so we're leaving off about 1970, 1980, and there has been a whole lot of good stuff that has gone on to preserve and enhance the parks. So, does anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple. What is Fold 3? Your research tool you mentioned?
Fold 3 is an online database, much like Ancestry.com. As a matter of fact, I think I even pay for it through Ancestry or get a deal. It's military records that goes back at least to the Revolutionary War. So it's kind of an invaluable thing if that's what you're after.
And where did the name LE come from?
The LA?
French term.
Yeah, it's a French term. Kim, help me out. How would you describe?
Just it's an avenue of trees, usually an avenue of beautiful trees to make a kind of a statement, a walkway, or a
Sight
road,
line.
or just a passage, or an open space too can be allowed.
Perfect. So the LA and Warner Parks, which is again a really signature, unique feature, it's where that's where you get your cardio. You don't have to go even into the park, up, you know, deep into the woods. You can just up and down, up and down.
I have several pictures of that with my parents from the 30s,
Mm-hmm.
which I gave to the Friends of Warner Park.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad you did. I never saw them, but that's okay. Yes, ma'am.
What happened to that little area in the park where if you parked your car one way, before you were going in, but it would go the other way?
Right, Gravity Hill. That road is closed, but there is a picture in the book commemorating it, because when I would talk to people about, oh, you got to put Gravity Hill in there, that was really cool. So it's an optical illusion. What is it? You look like you should be going down, but you're going up, or the reverse is true. And it's off Old Hickory, and it's right across from one of the entrances, one of the drives that you can still do. And it's between Highway 100 and the steeplechase. Yes, sir.
Is there any access to the Hill property yet?
Yes, you can go to the Hill property. That's a story for chapter 2, but the Hill property, if you don't know, was another huge capital campaign. Well, they weren't building anything, so it wasn't really capital, but it was an acquisition fund to purchase the old growth forest that H.G. Hill had bought and preserved with great joy. You can get, the Nature Center offers tours that you can't pull up and just walk in, because they are so concerned about invasive species that they really are trying to keep the Hill property as safe as possible, meaning, you know, there's not Lonicera and Japanese honeysuckle and all of that stuff and other things in it. So if you get, you can go with a group, but the way to do it is to call the Nature Center and see when they're offering the next outing.
There's an interesting story though about that property. I assume you're aware of that, but property was bought by H.G. Hill to build their house
Mhm.
on. And when his wife went out there, she refused to live that far out of town. So he built the one in Hillwood there and
Mhm.
he just kept that property.
Yeah. She said, nobody will come see us way out here. In Bellevue now, basically. Which, you know, I live in Bellevue, and I have people go, well, Bellevue's kind of far, isn't it? No, not really, but that's okay. But yes, that is a true story about that. Yes.
What exactly is Friends of Warner Park?
Friends of Warner Park, glad you asked, is the nonprofit organization that is completely dedicated to advancing the interests of the park. And basically they function as a fundraising arm that the city really can't do. They also function as the point of contact for many volunteers. I mean, the parks could not run without the volunteers.
And that was largely accomplished with the leadership of Edwin Warner's grandson, Warner Bass.
Yes, Warner Bass. One of the pleasures that I have doing this is I got to know Warner a little bit, and I just think the world of him.
Edwin Warner Bass.
Yes, yes. It's Edwin Warner's grandson, and Warner Bass is an attorney, and he is quite an outdoorsman. He's been very involved not only in the Warner Parks and raising money to preserve land, but also with what is it? The one that the land
Trust?
Yeah, Tennessee Land Trust. Thank you. So he's a real good guy in a white hat in my book. So it's interesting that the family, it's not a closed thing at all. I mean, everybody's welcome to come be a part of the parks and help. And there's, you know, if you can lift a pencil, you can help the parks, much less do all these other things like clear trails that needs to be done. But the Warner family and its descendants have really hung in there for the parks. Govan White's family paid for the restoration of the Doherty gates, that main entrance. Laura Lee Knox, who just passed away this February, was just an all-around champion for the parks. If you knew her, you were lucky. So the families really, they pass it down as a legacy of like, okay, we're in this. This is what we do. We completely understand the importance. Yes, ma'am.
These families were really lovely because not only did they do the parks, but the Warner brothers and the Lee family were instrumental in helping women get the right to vote. They gave a ton of money and effort to make that happen. So they were civic-minded in so many different ways.
Yes, yes, thank you for that angle on it. And when Percy Warner died of a heart attack, his brother Edwin just, and this goes to the point that I was just making, his brother Edwin just rushed in to fill the vacuum. He got on the Parks Board, he became the chairman of the Parks Board, and he's really the one that took the park from simple founding and made it into a park. You know, he worked to see that the WPA efforts were completed and in the right way. And he himself and his family gave $20,000 in, I want to say, the late 30s. I could be mistaken by that. But it was money that went a lot farther than it does today. So they, you know, he walked the walk and talked the talk and was consistent. And there's a story that he would work in his office, and then in the morning, and then in the afternoon, he would come to the park. And the story goes that you could set your watch by him showing up at the park. So he was completely committed to the park. Any other questions? We're right at 2:01, Gene. We did it.